Hello and welcome to World of Tanks with Marumo. Today we're going to be looking at the Cruiser Mark III on the A13. So I just thought we'd start by having a look at the tech tree and comparing this to what happened in real life. And generally what we can see is that the Cruiser 3 is a pretty general Tier 2 light tank in World of Tanks. It has a pretty standard view range of 320 meters. The armour on the turret is pretty low, as you'd expect from a Tier 2. The upgraded turret is in some ways better. Weight increases, even though the armour decreases. Which, in my opinion, is pretty poor choice. I mean, you do get a slightly increased reload on the guns, but overall, I prefer to stick with the stock turret. After that, you've got a choice of 4 radios going from Tier 3 to Tier 7. Overall, you probably don't need to go past the Tier 6 radio, unless of course you're thinking of going down this line, which I decided to. After that, you've got a pretty good engine. The power to weight ratio on the Cruiser Mark III is very, very good. You're generally going at your top speed pretty much all the time. The engine power of 390 is quite substantially higher than the 340 that you get from the stock Tier 3 radio. And the tracks, they do allow you to add more modules, but on this tank, I overall say, get them if you can, but at Tier 2 it's not really that necessary. When we look at this tank, it's important not only to, of course, look at it in the way of World of Tanks and say, is this a good seal clubbing machine? Do I want to keep this tank forever? But it's also important to say, what was the history of this tank? How did it perform in real life? And in real life, it did spectacularly well. In real life, it was known as the Cruiser Mark III A13, and the A13 was pretty much revolutionary because in the 1917 an engine was developed for planes, which made this tank particularly fast. But the British never had suspension that could quite work to give it the off-road performance that they wanted. It was only when the Americans gave us the Christie suspension that we were able to start getting tanks that could go at those speeds and handle those engines. If you look at the medium Mark I at Tier 1, you can pretty much see what I mean by that. It's an overall pretty slow machine. 7.66 specific power is pretty poor. 24 kilometers per hour maximum speed is really just very, very poor. Whereas if we look at the Cruiser Mark III, it's a substantially different tank with a specific power of 27.28 and a top speed of 48 kilometers per hour, which really reflects just how incredible the Christie suspension, coupled with the Nullfield version 12, was in getting the tanks to move quicker. However, there was always a problem with this that the British had, and the problem was that the turrets that the British wanted to use were always a little bit too big and too heavy in order for the American hulls to work for them. And this was a complete and utter problem. They couldn't mount these turrets and get them to do the performance they wanted on the battlefield. Because as we all know, in reality, the whole point of getting a tank onto the battlefield is not only to protect the crew within the tank, but is also to make sure that you have an extremely good gun for those positions. Now, in real life, the A13 had the 2-pounder, which here at World of Tanks is this Tier 3 gun. And even in World of Tanks, this is a pretty good choice of gun. It's got a rapid reload, it has pretty high penetration. However, I personally decided to go with this 40mm pom-pom gun, which wasn't very historically accurate, but this is a video game and we're trying to get the best performance we can. If we just compare these two guns, you can see that the pom-pom gun has got a lower accuracy. It has a slightly lower penetration. However, it does have an auto-loader, or as it's written here, a magazine loading system. And this is incredibly important because if you're using the 2-pounder, you have to expose yourself for quite a long time. If you're using the pom-pom gun, you can generally take out a tank whilst only taking 1, possibly 2 at the most hits, which is very important at Tier 2 when pretty much everything can either 1 or 2-shot you. So going a bit further on, the turret. And the turret was the main problem, as I said, because it was always just too heavy. So in order to get around this problem, the British actually developed a completely new hull. They took the Christie suspension and they lengthened the hull, made it a little bit better. It was through doing that that we came with the Cruiser Mark III. And the Cruiser Mark III was exceptionally wanted. I mean, it went into testing in November of 1937, and 65 of the vehicles were ordered in January 1938 before the trials were even completed. This was a tank that, even before it had any real testing, was already wanted and adored by the British. Now this is, in World of Tanks, in my opinion, one of the best Tier 2s on the British line. If you take a look at the entire British line at Tier 2, you've got the Cruiser, the UC 2-pounder, which is... it's okay. You've got the Medium Mark II, you've got the M2, the Cruiser Mark I, and the Lloyd gun carriage. And out of all of those, I'd say the only ones you really want to be keeping are either the Cruiser Mark III, the Universal Carrier, and possibly the M2. The Cruiser Mark I, whilst interesting, I just don't think it quite beats the Cruiser Mark III. So let's just take a quick look at what you could also get at Tier 2. The Japanese don't really have anything. The only nation that really has anything that can compete, in my opinion, are the Americans with their T-18, which is quite a good seal clubber because it's got this howitzer here, which is really quite good fun. I'm not sure if you've played it before, but if you haven't, you owe it to yourself to give it a quick try. And the only other one that I believe could have any real competition over on the German line. And if we just look on the German line, the only one that I think can really do it is this Jagdpanzer. And this is very much a classic tank destroyer, no armour, but a pretty good gun. It's 4.7 centimetre. So, overall, we've discussed that in real life it was loved by the British, and it did incredibly well. But what about here in World of Tanks? How does it live up? Well, very historically, it has got 14mm of armour all around, and this is very historic. In real life it weighed 14 tonnes, and it had 14mm at the most. So, you know, that 14mm of armour, you're not really going to be getting much more than that at Tier 2. But at the same time, that does offer you the problem that if anything fires high explosive, it is going to go through. However, as you can see, this tank has got quite a large hull, but the turret is what makes this tank special. Its turret has got quite good gun depression. So what I generally find that I do in this tank is I will crest a hill, I will pop the turret over, angle the gun down, and fire my clip into an enemy tank, destroy it, and then fall back to reload for 8 seconds or however long it is. Further than that, there's not really much to say about this tank. It's quick, but it doesn't really keep up with many of the other light tanks, especially since you're a Tier 2, you're going to be meeting Panzer 1Cs. It really can't keep up with those, but the manoeuvrability is acceptable. The armour, as I said, terrible. Hit points, it's Tier 2, it doesn't have any hit points. View range, well, it's a Tier 2, you're going to spot everything and be spotted by everything pretty quickly at Tier 2. And signal range, no one really cares about signal range unless it's a Russian tank, because the Russians have terrible signal range. If we look a little bit further than that, I've gone for all AP ammunition. This is purely because I think that a good 34 to 56mm of damage is purely good enough. I don't think I really need the high explosive. You could choose it for artillery, but I really just don't think it's necessary. An APCR, well, APCR ammunition is going to cost you 800 credits per clip, 800 credits per shot, and that's just going to end up being thousands and thousands of credits gone on your Tier 2 games, which is something nobody wants. To cap off, I'm just going to have a look at some of the modules. You've got the camo net, which I've decided to go for because, you know, no armour. But generally when you're at Tier 2, no one really has very good view range. You find that a lot of players who start off in World of Tanks have their Tier 1s kitted out with their top crews, but then they remove them and put them into the barracks, so when they get to Tier 4, Tier 5, they can put them into their new tanks and actually get some crew training done on them. So the camouflage net I find works quite well on this tank because view ranges aren't very high. Other than that, toolbox, possibly if you've got one lying around. enhanced gun laying drive would really work well on this tank, but unfortunately it is normally 500,000 credits and I'm not really willing to spend that much money on my seal clubbing machines. Coded optics, again, there's a lot of money. Binocular telescopes, if you have one lying around, by all means. Other than that, enhanced Christine suspension, no, it's just not worth spending that type of money, and you're not going to get any worth from it at this tier. Light spore liner, possibly. You have got 4 crew members, and you have only got 14mm of armour, so they are quite likely to die. Especially as at tier 2, you're going to be meeting tanks with machine guns. But honestly, I find if you've got a first aid kit, you're generally not going to be losing crew members enough to get enough use out of it. The final piece of modules I went for was improved ventilation, and that's purely because it gives plus 5% to all my crews, and that's a really quite good piece of equipment that I generally carry through pretty much all of my tanks up until probably about tier 7 when I switch it for a vertical stabilizer. So overall, what have we said about this tank? We've said that it's got acceptable hit points. We've said that it revolutionised the British tank industry when it came out because of its Christine suspension. We've said that its mobility, whilst good, doesn't really keep up to the top tiers that it's going to be seeing. And its gun is probably its one and only redeeming factor because of the turret that it's in, giving it good gun depression. Hello and welcome to the second part of the video. This will be the more interesting part for some of you where I actually use the tank and you'll be able to see it in performance. For those of you who weren't here for when I was telling you about the statistics of the tank, the basic parts are that it's a cruiser tank, relatively quick, but the main predominant feature of the tank is its gun and the good gun depression. You won't see me relying on the armour because it's incredibly thin. So this is a this is a standard battle on mines. I'm going to be going over onto the western flank, which you'll see in a minute, and I'm going to be using this tank mostly as a spotter at the start of the game, and as we move into the middle of the game I'll be using it more as a flanker to take out the tanks that have got lower hit points and have already taken some damage. Game mode is pretty standard. You've got your normal seal clubbers in the T18s, a few T57s, which isn't a very normal seal clubbing machine because it's an SPG, but of all the SPGs it's probably one of the more liked. Other than that, you've got a T7 car, which is always humorous because they have terrible penetration, and the enemy team have a few more tier 1s than we have, but it appears that they've got a LOL tractor platoon, which generally people in a LOL tractor know what they're doing. As we come around the corner I spot my first enemy tank, T26, which is the Russian tier 2, and I'm not really that interested in going up there and facing him with my 14mm of armour, so I turn to look behind me to see that there is at least someone on the hill behind me who can take shots at him. And then I spot that there's also a Cruiser 3 up there as well, and he's got the same turret as me. However, as I could see from that little outburst, he's got the machine gun, and not the 2-pounder or the pom-pom gun. So I just go backwards and forwards, try and shoot at things over where the T7 car is, but don't seem to be able to get a lock on him, so I just wait where I am a little bit whilst I am de-spotted. And then I go around and I try and spot again. And I back up again, to try and allow my friend in the M2 light to try and get some shots into him. I auto lock on to try and fire at them, fire my clip, take one hit, and I don't know, I think that was probably a bad decision to even try and take them on. I should have left it to the SPGs and people behind me, but I was getting impatient with them not doing any damage to them. So I signal for help and I ping them on the map, and Panzer 2D behind me sends out an affirmative message. So I'm not really getting to use the speed of the vehicle here, I'm just really using general spotting mechanics to back and forth spot these little tanks so that my allies can destroy them. Now this probably would have been done better by maybe the Panzer 2D, possibly the M2 Light, But, you know, I was in the position, so why not? The T-18 has just come up to back me up here, and, you know, I'm backing up and forth thinking, should I go up and try and take a shot at them? And ultimately I decide that, you know, T-18's got the armour, he can do it, and I can just sort of follow him in when he decides to go up. So he's taking the first shot and I move up and take some speculative shots. Not really hoping to penetrate, just hoping to scare him back. Come around the corner, destroy him, and I sit back and reload whilst the M2 light and possibly the T-18 behind me move up to kill the cruiser. Now at this point I should have realised that there was a LOL tractor over by Alpha 1, but it wasn't until he started shooting me here that I realised, there you go, there he is. I didn't realise he was there, so I fired some shots. Now that's very important what he just did there. He was firing not where I was going, but where I was. Which, you know, you must be thinking, Marumo, how can you be annoyed by him, you know, shooting at you? And it's not so much that he's shooting at me, it's the fact that he's shooting where I was, not where I will be. And that's why all of the shots that he fired as I came down that hill missed me. So as we go on again, there's another one. He just missed by firing at where I was. So I just hide here, reload, and start aiming at this LOL tractor behind me. I take one shot, take a second one, and then kill him. Probably a little bit lucky I didn't shoot the M2 light there, should have let it aim in a little bit more, but I wasn't too worried about hitting him because he wasn't a one-shot kill anyway. You take an accidental hit there from possibly the Panzer 2D to finish off the LOL tractor. And I very cautiously go up the hill, but decide it's not worth going up without a full clip. I wouldn't have been able to kill the T-18 and the TE1 Cunningham if they'd have decided to team up together. So I back off and reload. Now I just wait for a little bit whilst I wait for a few more people to come around their cap circle so they won't be shooting at me as I come up. They've both been spotted now, so I'm not too afraid of getting hit by either of them. So I decide to come around the corner, finish off the T1, and then move on. I move into the cap circle just to make sure that if the T-57 SPG was aiming at me, he wouldn't have been able to hit me. But we just saw there that he fired a shot out over, possibly to the Panzer 2, so I know he's reloading. So I come up the hill, auto aim onto him, and kill him. And so that's the review for the Cruiser 2. I hope that gave you a little bit of an idea of what it's like, and we'll just move on now and have a look at how the battle results were. But overall, that was a very standard Tier 2 game. And that's the kind of gameplay you can expect. A lot of waiting around for enemy tanks to stop looking at you and then popping up whilst they're distracted and killing them with your pom-pom gun. So, here's the final results screen. As you can see, we damaged and destroyed 4 enemy tanks and we got some assist damage on one of them. So, as you can see, this was a first class mastery badge, which, you know, it kind of gives you some idea. 658 experience is above, I believe, 90% of the players who play this tank this week. So generally, you're going to be getting ace tanker in quite low experience games, really. If we just take a look at our team here very quickly, you'll see that I was top for experience, more likely because of the number of kills I got than the number of enemy tanks I damaged and the amount of damage I actually got. If we look at the enemy team just very quickly, they didn't really do very well. The highest damage was 213 from an SPG, whereas our highest damage was 512. So, you know, me and the person who did top for damage, Stefan Luke here, who did, wow, what an amazing game, 158 shots. The two of us combined probably did about the same amount of damage as their entire team. And if we just quickly look at the detailed reports, you can see that generally every shot I fired penetrated. Pretty much every shot that hit me penetrated. There was one that went into my tracks that wasn't counted as a penetration. But other than that, you can see it's pretty cheap to run. We lost about 1,200 of the credits that we pulled in and made a grand total of about 7,000 off that game. and received quite a nice profit really in experience just from a quick 5-minute game. So I hope that gives you some idea of what the Cruiser 3 is like and whether or not you want to keep it for yourself. And I hope to see you next time.